5:05. It's a workshop meeting tonight for the Board of Trustees. We do have the township's attorney here with us to deal with the potential ordinance, so we were going to take things a little bit out of our normal order, if that's okay with the board. We'll do a couple quick housekeeping while he ran out to his car, and then we'll move that up to the top of the agenda to discuss so that he can give us what we need to know and then be on his way. So with that, do we have a motion with regard to the review and approval of minutes from February 8th?
Moved.
We have a motion. Do we have support?
Support.
The motion support. Edits, changes on the minutes for February 8th. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. February 1st.
Oh,
Yep, the last workshop meeting.
I got that one too here.
Anything on the February 1st workshop minutes?
You and I were not there, so.
If I'm looking at the other three.
I probably left them in my car. No, have a copy.
Okay, all in favor of the minutes as submitted, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? They're approved. Al, you want to give us a quick rundown on the bills?
You've got them in front of you. Don't looking for anything that's jumping at me, but
Gary, have you?
I looked at them and there's nothing really unusual in there.
relatively light month, actually.
Those are always good.
Okay, we'll go ahead and put them on the agenda for next week. Anything before we leave the bills behind for tonight? And none, Al, put them on the agenda for next month, please, or next week. And at this point, I'm going to defer over to Brad Springer from Skolton Fant to walk us through the Holland Retail Water Agreement.
And before that, Brad gets started, just a little bit of background. What we're doing is that, Brad and I've been working on this for 2 years, about 2 years now. Brad's helping us with this. Ron Bolcher had a conflict with the Holland BPW, and he could not be our attorney on this, so we had to go to outside counsel on that. This is a major document. This is a 30-year contract. That's why I'm bringing it to. It's why we spent 2 years pounding this thing out. Well, I bring it to you now and not looking for you to even put on the agenda till the earliest next month.
Next month, meaning April.
April.
Okay.
April. Not this, no, there's a lot here. I think we've got a very good document for us. Not perfect, but as good as we can negotiate with the city. Places are existing contracts. Starts fresh. I think did I say 30? It's a 30-year term. Automatic 10-year renewals. We have to cancel it 10 years in advance. So this is a big deal for us. So with that, I don't think you're going to want Brad to really fly spec stuff for you, but just kind of some overview of the different sections, and I'll jump in when I've got something that I really want you to focus on. That sound reasonable, Brad?
Sure. Yeah, I'll defer to you and your board. So basically, this new proposed agreement would basically replace and synthesize the two separate agreements that you currently have in place. One is a retail water agreement and the other is a service agreement. Both of those are with the Holland BPW. So the new proposed agreement basically combines the different rights and obligations of those two agreements, puts forward in a new restated agreement, but with some different, with some changes. And the primary changes are that your current trunk main, which currently you basically have ownership of in connection with Park Township and Holland, that ownership would be recognized as transferred to the Holland BPW. So the effect of that transfer is essentially if something goes wrong with it, they're responsible for any maintenance or replacement repair of that trunk main. Another significant change is that under the new proposed agreement, the City of Holland, the BPW, is essentially in charge of not only operating the system, which they have been doing under the current agreements, but also they are now responsible for the so-called replacement of the current system. And that replacement would be taken out of the uniform rates and charges, which would be applied the same to Laketown as it would to other parts of the Holland system, which includes Park Township as well. When I use that word replacement, that has a special meaning. And basically what it means is that there's a distinction between expansion of the system and replacement of the system. And again, cut me off if these are terms that you are already familiar with, but I'm just trying to highlight that the point is that if a pipe that we currently have, a distribution main, for example, needs to be replaced because it's exceeded its useful life, the cost of and it's in Laketown Township, the cost of that replacement, again, that's called a replacement, would be borne by the City of Holland as part of the revenues that it's generating from the system. Same thing with a repair. If there's something that gets damaged in the ordinary course and it is requiring a repair, that repair also is the obligation of the City of Holland, borne or paid for out of the revenues generated by the system. What would not be paid would be an expansion of the system. So like we have a new developer and new development, and we need to expand our system in Laketown Township, then the township would be responsible for that so-called expansion or that expense. That's true under your current agreement. That also is true under the proposed agreement. Not sure if there's questions about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we're just want to piggyback off what Brandon's saying. So currently have the two agreements, the retail agreement and the restated water agreement. The retail agreement essentially goes away because in that agreement, we have the ability to say, we're not going to be retail anymore. We decide we want to be now a wholesale customer. Today, if we tell Holland BPW, we don't want you to maintain and operate our system anymore. We don't want you to bill our customers. We're going to take that all in-house. We have that ability to do that with some noticing today and run our own Laketown BPW. That's the way we've always had this ability since our first contract going back to, I think, 1978. Part of the big deal here that we're giving a little bit is we're saying to Holland BPW, we are going to stay a retail customer of yours. This is your baby. You can count on it for the next 30 years that we're not going to yank this away from you and yank that business away and do it ourselves. We're going to stay as a retail customer, and we no longer will have to be able to go to being a wholesale customer unless we break the whole agreement. Now, if you look at the population that we have on the Holland water system in Laketown, you're looking at roughly today, probably 12 or 1,300 customers. It's not big enough to support our own DW. It's going to take a lot of growth for us to want to kind of growth that we don't want and aren't planning for in our master plans and such. So the reality is we really aren't giving up anything. The likelihood of us ever wanting to go wholesale, it's been 40 some years and we're at 1,200 customers. It's not really going to happen. The other thing that we are giving up is the partial ownership of that trunk main. That trunk main begins at the Holland water intake on the north side of Lake Mac in Park Township, continues for a short distance through Park Township, goes under the channel to Lake Laketown, comes up by 32nd and South Shore in Park Township, and then runs east along 32nd Street all the way to Lugers in the city of Holland, then south into Laketown, then east again on 147th. This is a massive concrete, I believe it's 36-inch main that was put in, it's again, 1970s. By our current trunk main agreement, anything that happens on that section from Park, water plant, all the way through Laketown, going in the city, anything breaks on there, we're responsible for 1/3 of the cost of. Remember what 5 years ago or so, we got stuck with a $65,000 bill to repair a valve. So this is a case where ownership is not a good thing. Ownership is especially not a good thing if you don't have revenue coming in to cover those costs of that repair. This puts all that onus over to Holland, BPW, Holland City. This is their baby. Now, if you're looking at this, once again, this is a 1970s water main. So it's what, 45 years old, probably. It's got some life left to it, but it's starting to get older. And the biggest thing about this contract is to walk away from that trunk main agreement is a very good thing for Laketown. Losing the ability to go wholesale is a minor thing, something we probably never use anyway, an easy chip for us to give in on. The maintenance, as Brad said, is all going to be on maintenance and replacement of the system. It's all on BPW, essentially the way it is today. There are some cases where it's not going to be their responsibility to fix, it'll be ours. Basically, sort of an act of God kind of thing. And we tried for literally months to make that different, and we just couldn't budge that. That's no, it just wouldn't work. Okay. So that's,
Let me pick up on that
Yeah.
point before you
Go
continue,
ahead.
because that's an important point. So under this proposed agreement, Holland is, the BPW is responsible for any necessary replacement or repair of the system, but there's an exception, and the exception is events due to force majeure or acts of God, which is legal language that means if there's certain acts that are beyond the control of the parties, specifically an earthquake or a fire or an explosion or a sinkhole or there's certain other, a landslide, or there's a couple of other examples like that that are
Says
specified.
floods and terrorism, wars, all
Yeah.
kinds of things.
Yeah. In those events only, if there's damage resulting from those events only, the city is not responsible to repair and replace our system. But any other damage or needed replacement of the system from, say, normal wear and tear or age, obsolescence, anything else like that would be covered under the agreement as the city's responsibility to repair and replace for us.
So a sinkhole caused by a leak in the pipe because of failure to maintain is on who?
on them.
I would,
Well, I'm just saying because it does reference sinkholes,
Those are the kind
so,
of things you could argue about, but that's, that would really be on them for the lack of maintenance.
okay, that's what, I just wanted to make sure that those type of situations,
Acts of God.
right?
And God didn't cause the leak. So.
I think that's a good question. I mean, and that's the kind of question that, like Al said, it's not perfect, the agreement. I feel like we pushed on items that we could push on.
Sure.
There was not a lot of flexibility from the city on other items. That was one of them that we pushed hard on. And ultimately, they were not willing to budge on that exception. And so we're left with proposed language that you're pointing out. I would argue, and I support Al's interpretation on that, that if the sinkhole is caused by a leak in the system, that is a repair obligation that is caused by repair failure. Therefore, it's the city's obligation because it resulted from improper repair or failure to repair.
Oh, I'd make
But-
that argument all day long, but it's,
But the point I think that you're making is there is uncertainty there, there's room to argue and, so I think there's risk. There is some risk.
There is some risk, but that current risk is in our agreements today also. It's not new risk we're taking on. This is in our current restated water agreement today. So we just, but it had some risks that we could not get rid of.
I think that's part of why the negotiation was more difficult than maybe it otherwise would have been. And that is, and this is just supposition on my part, but I think the city felt like they were starting from a certain starting point with existing current language that's already in place. We already agreed to it. It's already there. Why would we go backwards, from the city's perspective? Why would we, not insist on carrying forward certain language and protections that are already in the current two agreements?
obviously I haven't gotten all the way through it. But is there service level agreements and obligations in here so that, if somebody wants to develop a subdivision out here and the planning commission says yes, and everything's a go, and their developer's willing to pay the freight to hook it in and all the rest of it. So from our perspective, it's all a go. Is there anything in here that obligates them to act with reasonable diligence to
Yes.
do that construction so that
Yeah.
they can't just sit on it and cause harm to?
We agree in here that we will build things according to their specifications, which we
Right.
do today. Their specifications and our engineer specifications. Their approval will not be unreasonably withheld, is built right in there. If there's any restrictions put on us, it's a restriction that must be system-wide. They got to put it on City of Holland residents, Park Township residents. If the water intake plant is maxed
Right,
and they know that they're not going to be able to increase capacity for 5 years, and they say, we simply can't allow any more homes to connect to the system or no expansion of the system. It's not just us, it's system-wide. We're all in this together. This is a really good thing.
well, I'm not thinking so much about something like that, straight out saying, no, you can't connect. It's kind of like our fun-filled friends at the cable company. We'll get to you, we'll get to you, we'll get to you.
Oh, no.
And we're stuck, there's no pressure point that we can push to say, no, you do it in the order of requests received or, something like that. In other words, an SLA to go with this. So if there is a hole in a main that needs repair, it gets escalated accordingly, because if there's a hole in the main that needs repair and I got 10 homes that don't have water and they need to reprioritize their maintenance crew. That's what I'm getting at.
The language is not very specific, but it is very general, but it is very clear that they have an obligation to operate and maintain the system, and that they have to treat all users basically uniformly.
Okay.
On location, so they can't give preferential treatment to city residents or Park Township residents versus Laketown residents. They can't do that. And that was one of the features that we insisted on. They did not push back. They basically granted our requests for language clarifying that.
Okay.
And also a second and related point to your question, they also agreed to our requested language on the definition of operation, maintenance, and replacement. And that's at the beginning in the definitional section. There's a definition for OM&R, operation, maintenance, and replacement. And I think you'll be happy that it covers basically any type of conceivable normal wear, tear, replacement item that you can think of.
Okay.
And that the agreement is very clear that it is the city's obligation to provide all OM&R, including cover all OM&R expense, except for the expense that we mentioned, which expense occasioned by acts of God or
Sure.
force.
Yeah, and you know, I noticed they left labor disputes and strikes and slowdowns and stuff in their force majeure clause. So there are people go on and strike and they decide not to settle it. It falls under that category too.
Well, just sort of related to that point, there's, you know, just as another example of some parts that you'll find aren't perfect that we would not want in here, and we asked that they not be in here, but did not agree, would be similar limitations on damages. Like as one example, it's in your current agreement, so it's basically carried forward. But there's a provision that says that the city's damages for any harm that's caused to us as a result of their breach of the contract, basically, is limited to the accumulated years prior billing, total billing. And it just won't on that. It's like I said, it's in your current agreements, but you know, you can see why we asked for accommodation on
Sure.
that. There's other sort of, I guess, what might be considered boilerplate provisions that are relatively favorable to the city and unfavorable to any party to the agreement, like Park or Laketown or Fillmore. You know, if you have specific questions about that, I could answer that. But the point being that, you know, is the language ideal? Is it 100% favorable to the township? No, it's not. But I feel like it addressed the concerns that would be of most interest to the board.
What, sounds like we gave on a few items or acquiesced. Are there things that we gained in return for giving up part ownership of the main and things like that?
Well, I actually think that's something that we get. To me, that's
To get out of the responsibility of having to repair or replace it.
to me, that's for the reasons that they all mentioned. Because right now, it's just basically a prospective liability. If something happens to your trunk main, it needs to be replaced. We bear a third of the cost of replacing it. And, you know, where does that money come from? Your general fund? I mean, you're not charging customers and creating revenue and banking revenue from the system. So,
Right.
you know, that would be a really difficult item to plan and prepare for. So I think that's I think that's something that benefits the township. I also think there's a benefit in that the new agreement clarifies that the city is responsible not just for operating the system, not just for managing the system, but also for replacing the entire system as it fails out of the general revenues of the system. You know, so they have uniform rates and charges under this proposed agreement. They have to charge the same water rates in Laketown as in the city, as in Park Township. And the city has an obligation to use those revenues to replace our system if something happens to our system other than damage from an act of God or a sinkhole or an explosion or a hurricane, the force majeure events that we talked about. So I see those as sort of the two main benefits of the agreement. It does provide you with a stable, dependable, reliable source of water for 30 years. It's a 30-year agreement. And just, I think I think you may have misspoke if I heard you correctly. It's renewable every 20 years automatically. And there's a 10-year notice provision. If you want to get out of the agreement, you provide 10 years advance for the expiration, 30-year term of the contract. So what that means is that the contract otherwise will automatically renew every 20 years, so that there's always a 20-year forward-looking future on the contract. So if you sign the contract today, the contract would last 30 years. If you wanted out of the contract on the 30th year, you would need to provide notice in the 20th year that you want to end the contract, which you could do. But if you don't provide the notice 20 years from today, that you want out of the contract, then the contract would automatically renew in 20 years or another 3 years. So there's always a 20-year lead time basically in front of you under the contract.
I see a chunk in paragraph 17 on the Rosenberg property. Is that still pertinent? Because I thought the city was selling that.
That chunk in there is not pertinent to us. That is pertinent in the Park Township agreement. And it's really just a carryover from the Parks agreement that is there. It could go away. And the reason it was in there is because the city owns the Rosenberg property in Laketown.
Right.
They bought that with BPW money, which was essentially paid for by partially by our own rates. Park had, before Park put its new agreement, which is very similar to this, not quite, but very similar to this, in place, the south side of Park, south of Lake Mac, adjoining to us, was a retail area, same as us. The north side of Lake Mac was a wholesale area. And they were using those wholesale rates to help buy that Rosenberg property. And Park said, well, just a second here. We've got some basically unknown number invested in that property. How do we get benefit from that when you sell it? Yeah, because the retail side, okay, they're covered. They got that money's going to go back into the system, but that wholesale part that Park gave up. They did the same thing. They gave up their wholesale area, turned it all into entirely 100% retail area now. That's where the Rosenberg property comes in. So for us, doesn't really matter. The money is going to go back into the BPW's coffers, unless the city tries to grab it somehow. Yeah, but
question on pages 25, 26, and top 27 on indemnification, the hold harmless part of the agreement. Just wondering, that holds us harmless on all.
So that's a good question. Let me explain how this works. So the indemnification provision that is in the proposed contract arises from the existing contracts that you already have from the city. And so this is an example of where the city wants basically to carry forward existing indemnification obligations and responsibilities that are in current agreements. So what this indemnification paragraph provides is essentially a two-way, it looks both ways. So there's an obligation for the city to indemnify or reimburse Laketown if the city does something that causes Laketown to incur liability. And then the mirror image of that is the city must reimburse us if the city does something that causes us to incur liability. So that's the mirror image nature of the indemnification. But there's more to say about the indemnification. Under the current agreements, the indemnification obligation basically says that each side has to reimburse the other for any liability resulting from any claims. And to me, that created a serious confusion about what any claims meant. Would that mean claims between the parties themselves, or is it limited to third-party claims? Like a customer who incurs some kind of harm resulting from mismanagement or operation of the system, that's known as a third-party claim. Third-party meaning not a direct party to the contract, but some third party, a party that's not party to the contract is called a third party. So what we've done in the current proposed language, which the city did agree to this requested change, is to limit the indemnification obligation to third-party claims only. So that's been clarified. I think that probably was always the intent anyway, but it was just, again, kind of unclear before. So that's something that they've given us as clarification, that the indemnification is limited to third-party claims. But something else to say about the indemnification provision is that, and I think this also carries forward from existing language in the agreements, if I remember correctly. The indemnification obligation that each side owes the other is limited to this extent. If the city sues Laketown, let's say a third party, a customer somewhere in the system, sues the city, and the city incurs liability from that lawsuit and looks to Laketown to reimburse the city. If the damage that plaintiff who sued the city suffered, if that plaintiff's damage was caused by the negligence or wrongful acts of the city in operating or managing the system, then in that case, Laketown would not have any obligation to reimburse the city for damage the city. So in other words, the indemnification obligation is limited to the extent that the damage was caused by the fault of one of the parties to the agreement. If you have questions about that, I can explain that in more detail, but basically it provides a level of common sense protection that we don't have to provide reimbursement if the fault that is being sued over was not ours. If the fault causing the damage was the city's. And the same as the mirror image is also is true from them to us.
Good, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. I would say one final thing on the indemnification provision. Again, this is an example of the kind of language that we wanted removed completely from the agreement, but because I think it's already there, I think that was the reason why the city was not willing to budge on that. And the reason I wanted it to be removed completely is because in practice, as a practical matter, the only likely indemnification obligation would be triggered by something that the city does wrong. And so we questioned, well, why would we even want an indemnification? Why would we want to agree to having an indemnification obligation in a contract at all? Because if the city is going to be operating our system, what benefit do we get out of having a mirror image indemnification provision? Because really, as a practical matter, the only indemnification that's ever going to arise is going to be, a claim against the city and not a claim against the township. So maybe that's more information than what you wanted, but my point is this. As Al mentioned at the beginning, the document is not perfect. It contains paragraphs like that I would rather have removed completely from the agreement, but as a practitioner, the city was not willing to have a proposed agreement that did not have that provision in it.
I can almost understand the city in that because, we're not operating what risk, what liability are we going to cause them? But if for some reason the town should said something that was just downright wrong or stupid and did damage and caused a problem, if we did something that we decided to trench through a water main knowing it's there already and just wreak havoc and cause contamination in people's homes, or if we did something really, really dumb, they're gonna say, we're on our own on that one. So that's where, the likelihood, since we're not operating, that we're gonna do something like that, this doesn't happen, but there's that just in case clause, I guess.
I agree. I don't think it's unreasonable that they're
Yeah,
insisting.
it could happen, but really, really, really slim chance. But the more likelihood is that they're going to do something by one of their workers just doing something wrong and causing a problem. because they're the ones operating and maintaining the system. And that's where we have our coverage.
Is this the updated language copy or? that
This
that
is our final
includes
draft.
The latest and greatest in terms of the.
Yeah.
Indemnification, okay.
Does this cover things such as an increase, say, you have an increase in capacity and those types of things, who handles that? So you need to have more capacity in the system.
That's a good question, because in reviewing the current agreements, I was reminded that there are specific provisions that talk about what allocation does Laketown have for its total capacity. Interestingly, in the current agreement, there is no reference. Because what Al was explaining earlier, which is because the obligation is on the city to provide potable water to Laketown and the other communities that are part of the system, and they all have to be treated the same, then the capacity issue doesn't need to be specified. They have an obligation to provide us water, just like they have an obligation to provide the city residents water, Park Township residents water, and they can't treat the city residents better or different than they can treat us. So really, it resulted in allowing the details regarding the total capacity and who has what allocation to be unnecessary.
We have unlimited capacity. Our capacity is limited by the capacity of the entire system, which is a great thing. This is close to being a really true utility. This is how things are supposed to be done. We all have it. We all share in it. If the system is maxed out and we need to increase capacity, the BPW gets to make the decisions on that, on how to do that, what the cost will be, and those costs be shared by all of us equally onto our customers. So it's really a true utility model.
There was to pick up on that point, there's a provision that the supervisor pointed out earlier on the Rosenberg property piece. I forget which paragraph it is, it's towards the end, but it basically says that nothing in the agreement obligates the township to sell the city land that it doesn't already have if the city needs ultimately to install a new intake or have new property for new intake, new infrastructure. But the township is obligated to basically provide reasonable cooperation with permitting,
Access,
yes. And so
right of ways. Yeah.
and so that's another example of where, we have an obligation to cooperate. But we don't have an obligation to, contribute towards the cost of installing a new water intake or, any type of infrastructure that would benefit the entirety of the system as a whole. Final point on that. Just to clarify, if we do have a developer in Laketown and within our service area, obviously we would have to pay that cost of expanding the system within our service area. But I'm talking about, infrastructure that benefits the entirety of this water intake system, trunk main or something like that. Those expenses would be covered under the uniform rates and charges that are charged to all the customers, not just the Laketown customers.
Question. Oh, I'm sorry, Jim, go ahead.
I got like two questions, I think. One is there anything in here that requires the city to maintain a certain minimum water pressure for all residents? I know we had that issue with, was it Heritage Meadow or what was the condo complex up in the northeast corner of that?
Heritage Meadows does have parts of it that have less than desirable water pressure. But that was known going into that development. They have to abide basically by state laws, and that's covered in state law under Drinking Water Act, is it? Or but anyway, so that like Heritage is within the law. It's less pressure than desirable, and we do have a plan hopefully to correct that. Not in this agreement, but another side thing that's going on. But they have to operate within the laws of the state of Michigan, which covers all that. Cross connections, contaminations, pressurization, notification, all the standard state law. They must operate the system in compliance with state laws.
Under paragraph 7, it talks about the regulations applicable to the township customers. Are there any rules or regs that the city is going to be looking at us to adopt now or at the time of this thing? And I have to admit, I'm a little suspect on the idea that on the next page, it says the township will not refuse to adopt a reasonable ordinance in the future. I'm not sure we can make that promise of future boards. Because we don't know what it, it does say reasonable ordinances.
Right.
Rules and
Well,
rules and regs
we
are
can make-
different animals.
Yeah, we could make that on future boards, because if they're not adopting it, either the ordinance is not reasonable or the board's not being reasonable. And that's where the court comes in to shake that out. This is this kind of thing we already have in our sewer contract with the city, wastewater. Because the standards that the BPW has to live with vary by the state law and by the rules developed by Environment, Great Lakes and Energy.
Right.
So we have constantly have this problem going on I should say constant, but every 5 years at the wastewater plant, we got to re-up our NPDES permit.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Because now the states changed this, that the phosphorus limits is almost this much, and that they changed things, and now we've got to adapt the way we do things. That might require a change in ordinance, which affects everybody. So we really have to, once again, they can't make any requirement on us in that ordinance that they're not putting on themselves.
There hasn't been that hasn't been part of the negotiation. They haven't either provided, and I haven't requested what ordinances they would have in mind as requiring, but.
I just didn't know if anything was pending so that it's coming through as a package that
No.
here's the new contract and
Well, here's
and
an
here's the new
here's an
rules.
example that we actually dealt with many years ago, sprinkling ban. The system is maxed out. We need to put send out a ban on sprinkling system wide, because we don't have the capacity to sprinkle your lawns this summer, because our water plant is near max capacity. We have to save that for drinking water purposes. We'd have to, they put that on themselves. We'd follow suit with that, is that we're going to an odd even sprinkling, because it's good for the system. It's needed.
Technical question for you on the insurance provisions. Do we already have this level of insurance?
Yeah.
And
And I
then,
should also add, this whole document has been reviewed by our current insurance carrier. Make sure we get them on board with this. The one thing that they say in this review is that section 19, which we spent, I don't know how much time on 19. That's that act of God one with it. If the main gets busted by an earthquake,
right,
we have to pay for it. We don't have insurance coverage, and they won't sell it to us. They don't know where we can get it. This is the way it is. I have looked for coverage for this kind of thing for years, because that section 19 language has always bothered me. That's the reality out there. That's risk that I can't find a way around. And everybody in the state has that same kind of risk. That's where, if that earthquake were to happen, we better hope it hits at least 2 municipalities. Then we can run to the state and say, we need help. Emergency.
sure.
If it happens just to us, it's pretty hard to call that an emergency, but if it hits 2 municipalities, now we can start waving our hands to FEMA, to the state of Michigan, saying, we need to get bailed out here, folks.
Other question on insurance is just something I've seen the game insurance companies have played. And I've seen them try and deny, and reservation of rights letter, where they're going to reserve their rights on a claim because there's an indemnification provision, and therefore you're not obligated to pay the claim because the other side's supposed to pay it. And so they try and do that nice circular logic to protect their premiums without having to write a check out. I'm not sure if you've ever seen that game before, but just keep it in the back of your head on these insurance provisions. Because I'll add language that says this provision does not or is not connected to the indemnification provision. So the obligation to provide insurance coverage is not negated or limited by the indemnification provision. And then you run that past your carrier and make sure that they're on board with it.
Once again, they've read this.
Right, but I'm saying add the language if it's
We're-
not too late, you know, and if
We're not the states of adding language now. We're
Well,
done.
that's just something to watch for in a generic sense.
Yeah.
Because they'll use the other paragraph to protect their own profit margin. So. I trust but verify. Jim?
Page 11, paragraph 9. I recall a couple years ago, and I think
Yep.
it was BPW for electric, not water, but we had a brouhaha over them wanting to put some additional poles and antennas, and it was either Sanctuary Shores or Halcyon or,
Mhm.
and I think they wanted to put them on private property. We may have landed on, you know, it's got to be along a public right of way or utility right of way, but they were proposing to put poles up where some residents
Right.
went bananas.
Some
over
bananas.
it. Is
So-
that, it sounds like this doesn't protect us.
Yes, it does.
How does it protect us?
I'll explain that. So when we got into that situation where they needed to expand their repeaters, I'll call them, their reader repeaters, and they wanted to place many more in the township. There's some out there right now.
Right.
They wanted to place a lot more. It was because they were changing the manufacturer of the meter they were using and how well it could read distance. Okay. After we pushed back at the planning commission level about that and did not approve it, and if you remember, they eventually withdrew their request. They went back to the drawing board and said, you know, they of course, they never actually said this, but what they said was, yeah, that system's not going to work well in a more heavily wooded environment because of the need for so many more poles. So they changed, they went through the whole process. Actually, I think they had actually bought all the meters and they turned around and dumped them on the wholesale market to get rid of them and bought a whole nother type of meter that reads better through a dense foliage environment and needs fewer readers out there. So with that, we back in the planning commission, how many years ago was that? That's gone. What we are saying in here is that we will agree to the placement of up to 4 additional poles in the township. And if you look at the very back, second page from the end, it's exhibit B.
Right.
I didn't give you a color version, it's a black and white version. But you'll see the approximate areas of the township where those poles might need to be located. Now, as you see in that, that's fairly far south in the township. That's going down to the 138th Avenue area. They're only going to need those readers, those poles in those areas. If we ever get water in those areas, there is no water down there now, but if the water system is expanded further south, or currently as far south as 145th, we're getting another mile or so south of that area with the water system. Yeah, they are going to need to install a pole. And by a pole, do we talk about the size? We're talking like a 30-foot power pole, utility pole. We're not talking about a cell tower. Anything like that. We're just talking basically a utility pole that they can hang these on. That's what we're agreeing to. This is their promulgation study of what they would need if the system ever gets expanded that far. So most of the ones that are out there, I think there are, oh God, I bet 6 or 8 in the township right now. And like it'd be a scavenger hunt. Go find those for me. That's they're not easy to find. They're there. I realize, wait, there's a pole there and there's no wires going to it. There's a little thing hanging off of it.
There's one down the street.
Yeah, there's one down in your neighborhood. Yep.
Are these in wooded areas?
It blends.
Sometimes. But they cannot go on private property without the owner's permission, for one thing. Now, we're talking about road right of way stuff here. They can't go on anybody's private property without that owner's permission. They don't have the right to do that by this agreement. They'll be placed, in the road right of way if needed. The reason they need these is because the Holland BPW electric system only services a small area of the township. And those areas that are serviced through their electric system and have electric meters can also double in this duty to read the water meters in that home and in that area. But that's the majority of the township does not have Holland BPW electric available. Now, and it's unusual systems, like right across the street, Myron Fields, Holland BPW electric. Here in this building, consumers. That's a whole nother, we're going to talk about another utility we can get really deep in the weeds on. But those areas where the Holland BPW electric system is at now, they don't have a need for this because they can do it through their electric meters. Essentially, that's the far eastern portion of the township from here, going up 60th, around Myron Fields and Clairwood condominiums, Lugers Road, 61st Street, that area. The other new condos up there. That's where the BPW system is at. The area that Jim was talking about was Scenic Shores, who had very upset about the idea.
Yeah, I mean, when I first scanned that paragraph, I didn't see it actually says 4 additional pole locations, so that makes me feel better. I would think that if they came back down the road sometime in the next 30 years and said, you know what, we actually need 12 more, not 4 more, that we could have a conversation with them because the contract says 4.
Yes.
But it says below there, though, in the event the township shall adopt or impose any restriction which would prevent in whole or in part construction of network equipment, utility poles, et cetera, that we would be in default in the agreement and they could withhold connections and et cetera. So I don't know, it's a little ambiguous at that point, but
well, we're agreeing to those 4 locations, generally somewhere within that area shown on exhibits B. More than that, we come talking about contract amendment. The reality is this is going to be a non-issue probably within 10 years. I mean, the availability of broadband in Laketown now is huge. Now, the problem there is that it's a private contractor that has that ability, and BPW has their own broadband. But you're going to see things change. Those, my wager is those 4 poles will never be constructed. There's going to be alternative methods of doing it that'll work just fine.
Other questions or general topics on this for tonight? You guys have a solid 6-7 weeks before the April workshop. April agenda.
is there a fixed date when it has to be in place? with the city, or is it?
Our verbal discussions with the city is, would like this on your April agenda. Now, the city is ready to take action on that. They don't want to take action on their side unless they know that we're ready to take action. So if you're not ready in April, could we push back to May? Yeah, but you know, yeah, I mean, if we had to take longer, we could. That's why we're bringing it to you now, to give you plenty of time to read it, chew on it, ask questions of myself or Brad.
And keep in mind, if you've got questions and you send the email, send it to Al. We're not getting into email debates because that's open meetings. So
Send it to me. Any questions, send to me or call me and I'll get you an answer. And I'll,
yeah, Al can grab all the questions, get them all in one spot, and then turn that around to all the questions asked and all the answers, so that everybody's got the same information. But no,
don't do a round robin.
no email debates. Anything else before we let Brad go on his way? Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. And I'll look forward to questions and following up with Al. Thanks.
To the board members, you have homework.
Great nighttime reading.
All right. Now, what's the next big topic that we've got tonight is the budget.
Yep, you have the draft in front of you. You could step through that if you like, if you're ready.
Please.
So on the agenda, you'll see old businesses, the amendment to the FY 2022-23 budget amendment. And then under new business will be the public hearing on the FY 23-24 budget. Since the last time we talked about this a little bit last month, essentially what I've gone through here is just gone through and tweaked some numbers a little here, a little there, in several locations, but nothing major changed. I did a slight increase in our current year on our revenue sharing money because it's frankly better than we expected, because the state's economy is coming along quite nicely. Now everybody's got the copy. So nothing really to talk about on page one. You'll see we have a significant fund balance at the end of the month, into this month. And a lot of that though is restricted money for our roads, fire drains, bike path. You know, we spent some of it down this year and we're going to spend some more of it down next year. But we've really got in that one area right now, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500,000 of restricted cash just for roads, fire, bike path, and drains. And we're spending some of that in our proposed road work coming up. Flip into page 2.
Questions on page 1? All right, page 2.
Page 2. No surprises there, no significant changes to what I presented with you in the previous couple of months. Any questions on page 2?
Al, I know there was a question about the cost on the audit. You want to just give us an update on that?
Right.
Please?
Yeah, we incurred some additional costs in our bog audit. I mean, not really our audit. It's under the category of audit, but it's really more in our bookkeeping. We just had some little problems with our computer system where it was not acting right, and we weren't making entries correctly in some other areas, and some of the parts were not set up, and we were having trouble getting things to balance out and reconcile. And, usually a little minor thing I can get in there and figure out what's going on. This got above my skill level. I'm not a CPA. So we need to call in Kikover to say, hey, what's our problem here? So they spent a good time working with us on this, but we've got it all clicking along nice right now. Because this could have been kind of an issue for when we get ready to audit this year. Because it would have been kind of messy because things just didn't balance out like they're supposed to. And part of that, I'm not sure why, but part of it was some double posting that the system was doing. Now, maybe we had changed how we set something up, but we were posting some things twice in there. But that's what it was. It was bookkeeping that was above my ability to go in and fix. So we had to bring in the CPA's team.
And at this point, the CPAs are content.
Yes. Oh, yeah. No.
Yeah, I've got questions. I'm looking at this sheet here, page 2. I've got a question about contracted services. I see that all over engineering. There really isn't any explanation as to what those are.
Yeah, contract.
Go ahead, no.
Township Board Contracted Services.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that. I think last month. We passed out a sheet. Ooh, let me see if I have it in here.
You already got one. Going
Looks
down.
like this. Yeah. That's the contracted services breakdown. And the difference on this year, we talked about that last month too. The big difference why it's up to 113 is $50,000 over to the Community Enhancement Fund from our ARPA money for the nonprofits. So that rather than us trying to pick and choose between which nonprofit gets funded, we let the people who have more expertise in it do that for us, and we fund them to do that. So that's the biggest change from the previous year on the contractors, which is why it jumped up to 113 instead of 63. But then other than that, we have all these other nonprofits, which we normally fund in a very minor way, except for Friends of Felton State. That's our more major contractor that we work with to manage the Felton State for us. That's not changed significantly in several years.
And under each one of those services, they provide different services to the township residents.
Right, yeah.
In exchange for those
Yeah.
funds.
They provide some service to township residents, whether it be entertainment service like Holland American Legion Band, but we're talking about, $250. Or as a matter of fact, you'll see on the agenda that next week, Judge Baker is going to be here giving us an update on the Allegan County Legal Assistance Center. So, because that provides services, free legal assistance to county residents and Laketown residents who choose to use it on certain legal matters. Things like you can go and get a packet if you want a do-it-yourself divorce. Other things in there, Holland Chorale, Tulip Time, Holland Symphony, Arts Council. Some drug-related things like OR is in there and 70 by 7, and those folks, these things do get used by residents. One of the bigger ones is Evergreen Commons. That's huge. They provide a huge service that a lot of older Laketown residents use. So that's what the contracted services are.
Yeah,
I'm dealing with you guys.
Yeah. No, the question I also had was, I'm looking at this, and I've been asked by residents, it's not an easy thing to look at this. I mean, there are things that are not concatenated. Things all over the place. You've got contracted services here, not even so much the, proposed for 2023, but it's why don't we break it down so that we see these things like contracted services and what you just described to me on this sheet. So when people go to look at the sheet, they will know exactly what this money is being used for. Because people look at this, they have no idea. There's stuff over the place. You've got engineering in different places.
Well, this particular one, Jim, we've talked about many times over the
Yeah,
last.
I understand, we've talked about it, but I'm just saying, if you go on the web, there should be a way to go on the website, pull this up, maybe drill down and see what they are. You really can't do that. You know, so people ask questions about this. They have no idea as to where this stuff is, where the
I've got
expenses are.
somebody resident right now who I'll be answering tomorrow in a FOIA that wants copies of all of our contracted services contracts. I plan on responding to him tomorrow. So there is way. This is by state law. It is the manager's job to create the budget.
Oh, I
This
understand
is the
that.
kind of budget that I create. It is a simple budget. There are what, 8 pages here? It's not a 100-page document. No. It's not a park. You're not talking here. Park Township does have a fabulous budget document of about 100 pages. Park Township has a financial director on staff. You want to spend another $125,000, hire me a financial director to work on this. I get you that same budget.
Doesn't cost that much.
Yes, it
Al.
does, because he takes
Does
that
not
kind of
cost that much.
expertise, which I am not a CPA, Jim.
Yeah, CPA can do it for a lot less than 125
Gentlemen,
grand.
we're not
Yeah,
gonna
anyway.
argue.
Anyway, this is the budget that I created. Next question.
Other questions on the second page?
Oh, my main question is that's my main question. I mean, it's just very hard to look at this. This should be done transparently, and it's not. You know, we talk about transparency. We need to work on it. This is not transparent.
This is extremely
not.
transparent, so I totally agree with you.
It is
We're not-
transparent.
no.
It is transparent to you, Al, because you deal with this. It is not transparent to residents. Residents don't even know. I don't even think the board knows everything. So it's very transparent to you because you know. You deal with it. You put the numbers in. You compile it.
All right, other
So-
questions about specific entries, because this is the chance to ask them and get as much information on them as we want. All right, page 3. Any questions on page 3? Mitra, this isn't public comment.
My only question was the first line, salaries for the office. It looks like no increase is budgeted from the amended 2022. Are we thinking are we gonna have a little change in staffing, or are we not planning on any kind of a merit increase or a inflation adjustment?
Well, as we've talked before, I do have 6% typically worked in there for staff members.
Right.
We are going to go through yet another change next fiscal year, which will affect that number. I did not feel I needed to put more money in. I think the 175,000 for this year is going to be sufficient. And next year, I think it will still be sufficient. If I do run tight, I may have to come back to you, but I don't think I will. Because as we read in that email, we do have another retirement coming up. So that's gonna change things. That retirement will, in the short term, save the township some money. In the long term, that person will need to be replaced. New person trained. So that's why I don't think I need to put additional money in for next year. I think there'll still be sufficient cash there to cover our office salaries.
Other questions on this page? All right, that takes us to building and grounds page.
Oh, I'm sorry. I do have a question. Al, we talked about this a little bit. The expenses of elections because of
Mhm.
the 12.
Yes,
But it looks like we have less in the budget for elections, but that cost is going to go up.
right. We do have less in the budget generally because we expect fewer elections coming up. We know we have a May election, which would be relatively small. And we know that those new rules are not going to be applying to the May election. No, the state's already said that. The early voting will not be in place for May. Next election we expect to have in this coming up fiscal year is going to be the February, March presidential primaries. It appears right now that it might be two elections, a February and a March. That we don't know at this time for sure, but that's what it's looking like now. We also have the things that, okay, we are going to be doing things differently because of election laws. How are we going to do them? And the answer is, we don't know yet. Now, I think you're going to find that we will be, it's allowed in law. And I would think it just on the surface, it seems to make sense, is that we collaborate with neighboring units of government on the early voting. So that perhaps this location will be a location for early voting for precincts 1, 2, and 3 of Laketown and precinct 1 of Fillmore and maybe precinct 2 of Saugatuck Township or Manlius or Park Township, because they're right there. So all that is going to be is just have a different collection of tabulators in one location for each of those precincts. Same handful of election workers, whatever we're mandated to have, is probably going to be, I think, at least 3 people there that we're going to be mandated to have staffing that early voting, can be working for several communities at one time. Because it's not going to be a matter of these lines like on election day. At least I don't think we're going to expect this big wave. There's going to be some, but you're going to see typically they're going to have this open for 8 hours or 12 hours a day, whatever we're mandated to do. We don't even know that yet. And people will trickle in, do their voting, cast their ballot and trickle out. Yeah, that's going to raise our staffing costs, but I don't know how much yet. And I don't know also if that's going to be funded by the state of Michigan. You know, we have a Help America Vote Act. Maybe it's going to be, maybe HAVA is going to be funding some of that first. So my best guess, which we can amend as needed.
Other questions before we go to building and grounds? All right. Building and grounds, cemetery, fire department.
I can say on that is what I want to point out. You saw that, you know, I've had this money in the budget for our cemetery project, for our expansion mapping of the old, basically the mapping of the old section. And Michelle and I think have finally settled on a vendor, and that can really do a quality job for what we wanted to do. And that's, you know, basically, we've talked about this for a couple of years, trying to get this as in the old section of cemetery, we have a lot of plots. We don't really know if there's anybody buried there or not. And we found a company with just the ground penetrating radar that's going to give us a very good product for a very reasonable price. So we'll be able to put a whole new map together of the old section, which is something we've wanted for years because we don't know what the heck's going on there. Some of those graves go back to the 1800s. So that project is likely to happen next fiscal year. We think we've settled on a radar vendor, and we'll be talking on bringing our engineers in, Pride and Newhoff, to do the survey work for us to map it all out accurately, and possibly looking at the potential expansion of the cemetery in the northwest quarter. At least layout work.
Does that include like a walkway is that included in this price? Was it maybe to connect the two different
Oh, it could be, this is more just mapping,
mapping?
just the
Okay.
mapping. But see, by having the mapping, we'll be able to determine where a walkway could go. Yeah, it's a planning, this is really a big planning tool for us. So, know more what we're working with.
Planned capital outlay on buildings and grounds.
Planned capital outlay on building the grounds is my pet project, as it's been called, the solar array.
That's just a placeholder
Yep.
until we get back to that discussion.
Yep.
Questions on this page?
No, man.
That takes us down to the page that starts with Parks Commission.
Here's another thing I was talking about, the park development.
Mhm.
I'm assuming you said that's Walter's house, right?
Well, no, I said in my email to you, Jim, is that's a combination of basically round numbers, $25,000 for the mortgage on the Walters house and $100,000 placekeeper for grant match if needed on other grants and such. Those grants have not been identified yet. You know, we tried for the Spark grant. The state received 425 applications along with our two, and funded, I think the number was 20. We did not get there. Round 2 has not been opened up yet. The results of round 1, as far as our scoring, have not been opened yet either. So I'm sitting here waiting to see what did we do not good enough? Where can we improve? Where are they scoring things that we simply aren't going to be able to get past? Mostly social economic data. That's probably our biggest thing that hurts us in that Spark grant, but I don't know that yet. So
Oh,
Was
this
that,
is for, if we do have some grants possibilities come up, this provides us match. We also talked, about the concept of going for the trust fund grant to help us, carry some of the costs on the Walters house. That's not been up available yet. It's gonna be really soon. That's gonna be a March project for me. But we'll see about that.
I was gonna ask, the Spark grant that we did not get, that was for the backyard here, right?
Yeah, I put in 2 Spark grants. I put in one for the backyard, one to help with the bike path on Blue Star. We didn't get either. And I don't know how well one scored better than the other or what. They won't release that yet.
See, here's where it's clear as mud.
Mhm.
Because I asked number 2, where in the budget is the $22.60 monthly payment being paid for the Walters house? And you said under park development in the parks budget.
Yes,
So
that's what I just said. Yeah.
so it's part of the 125 that's in the column, 25,000 toward that
And then
monthly
if you
debt.
put out, that was the first question. Then down there further, you had another question was related. Which also you talked about the
Mhm.
125,000, and that's where I spilled out a little more for you that the PD Parks Development was a combination of that grant money and Walters.
Yeah.
So I answered that one twice in that email to you. So that was pretty fast turnaround for you, I thought, you know. You asked the question, I'll give it to you, but I can't read minds.
Now, the,
So I asked the questions.
Yep, that's good, that's fine.
the bike path construction, 300 grand, what,
Mhm.
where are we thinking that's gonna go?
That's the Blue Star path.
Is that Blue
We've
Star?
been working on it for several years.
Other questions on this page? Gary, you're awful quiet. You good?
I don't have any questions at all, really. Again, thinking back over the 30-some years I've been on the board, a budget is a working document. That's why we have amendments. You know, we'll be discussing the solar array. Money's in the budget. If it doesn't go, then that money,
What stays in the fund balance?
yeah,
This is a guide. That's all a budget is.
Yes.
A guide, it's a tool, try to give us some direction. Not a rigid document by any means. It's very dynamic.
Remind us, Al, I'm happy to see the Felt Mansion total expenditure down considerably, but I know we prepaid some bond. How'd we get from the 170 to the 75 on the bond payment? And
Because in this current fiscal year, we paid off 3 years of bond. Next year, we're paying off 2. Then the main bond at the Felt Mansion, the $525,000 bond that we took out in 2007 will be paid off. But we've accelerated our payments on that. What normally would have been a 20-year bond is being paid off in 16.
I've got my notes that I carry around with me on that one saying we're planning on paying that off in May.
Yes, May 1. Yep. Now, that is not
Bond
the
will
only
be
one. There is also another smaller bond associated with the Felt that we cannot call. We cannot pay off early. It only has a balance of $40,000. But it's an energy conservation bond, which locks in the rate we pay and gives tax credits for the lender on that. And that's what we just gotta let it run its course. It's got,
Matures
I
in
want to say 4 years.
2026.
Okay.
So it matures in
3 years.
2026. Any other questions on this one? All right, takes us to the fire department.
Budget's been reviewed and recommended for approval by the fire board.
Fire board, in the next few years, we're gonna have some capital costs out there. We've got a 30-year-old pumper right now and things like that. So chief and the fire board are, you know, putting our heads together on how to get ahead of those needs. We've got some other equipment out there that's not as high ticket as a new truck, but some of the hoses are getting old and you don't run out to the big box store and pick up a fire hose. They're not cheap. So the chief's done a nice job of anticipating capital costs out at the department and we're working on it. The other big issue out there is going to be staffing. And with 850 runs last year, most departments start adding full-time staff at 1,000 runs. So we're close.
For instance, full-time staffing. You know, right now, we do have 3 in the department. What we don't have is overnight staffing. In order to do that, you really need to have 2 people working. We're gonna be getting to that point, guys. You know, we got some day coverage. We're doing better. The reason we got 3 full-time guys on right now is because our days were so bare and skinny. Getting people to respond to calls. The chief can talk all day about this, so difficult day times. We got days pretty well covered. Early morning, overnight. That's the next thing that we're gonna have to work on, and you're gonna see basically a whole change in the Grasco Fire Department. It's coming. And we're doing okay now, but it's coming.
It's on the radar screen.
Now,
And as Linda talked about, we do have a 30-year-old engine that's got to be replaced. We're gonna start working on that with fire board approval this year. And hopefully we'll have it in service in about 2 years. That's the turnaround time. That's how far we gotta be planning ahead. We just don't go and buy one off the lot. Yeah. They don't have those at the big box store either.
Jim, you started to say something?
yeah, remind me how the Laketown contribution line. It
Mhm.
kind of goes up and down, up and down.
No, yep.
Is that based on the millage and what?
Based on those bottom two numbers you see there, very bottom of the page. Fillmore share, Laketown share, the percentages. Our agreement with Fillmore Township is that we have a formula we applied to the fire department's budget. 75% of that formula is based on the runs between the two communities, Fillmore and Laketown. 25% of it is based on the tax base between the two communities. We calculate those numbers every year and come up with the new percentage. You see, we're really basically staying right at 78-22. Last couple of years, 3 years, that's kind of where, we're settling at. You're seeing more runs are actually occurring over in Fillmore, not more than us. Their increase has been pretty solid over there because of their commercial activities going on. Our tax base has been growing pretty solid too. So we're going back and forth, but I think you're going to probably see, it's always going to stay in our 80-20 split, that ballpark. But that's what divides it each year.
Other questions on the fire department numbers? All right. Al, you want to walk us through the special revenue funds?
Special revenue, water and sewer, basically just a function of money in, money out. You get connections and collect trunkage fees and assessment money and pay for engineering on that. Keep track of our projects from the planning commission tosses our way for engineering. That's, so this is our basically total utility money. It's really just, it's token money really. Because we are a Holland Water retail customer. And we also have a very good wastewater contract. That's why we're not having big numbers in here maintaining those systems. It all goes on to the BPW, who collect the money from the users of the system to operate the system.
But we account for it separately, so it doesn't go in the general fund.
Right. Yep. I will say that with this last couple of years, we have used some of the water and sewer money to help pay down bonds on the next page early. You see, we have two outstanding bonds out there now, debt service funds, Goshorn Sewer Debt Service and Castle Park Water Debt Service. Next year, I believe it's also in May, I should say this year, May of 23. I believe that is the date that the Goshorn Sewer bond will be paid off and done. Currently, the Castle Park Water bond is paid off. I think they made an interest payment this week. Actually today, March 1st. On that. And that's why you don't see anything in the budget for next year on that, because it is done. That is paid off. So that was paid off early. That was Castle Park. Water was a 2008 bond,
Yes,
Yeah.
2008.
and so we paid that one off 5 years early. Castle Goshorn Sewer is 2005,
Yes.
so we're paying that off 2 years early. So by this time, when we're going through the budget for fiscal year 24, 25, this page will not exist.
Nice.
Got a smaller budget.
Question on the special revenue funds, debt service funds. General questions on the budget. Down there, you look like you're pondering.
I am.
I don't want to cut off the discussion. Else out there, otherwise we'll put it on the agenda for next month and take it up again.
Oh, one of the questions I had is health insurance.
Yes.
We pay $75,000-ish
Mhm,
for that.
mhm.
How many people are receiving that are full-time?
Let me
It
think,
seems,
let me think.
okay.
Oh, 1, 2, 3. 5. 8. 3 in the fire department, 5 in the office.
So the fire department isn't included with the office.
Well, fire department, all the fire department are Laketown employees.
Yeah,
Sure.
I've been in the
Okay.
fire department, Laketown employee.
So they're treated just like any other Laketown employee when it comes to that type of stuff.
Let's
Gary's telling me he's got 5 minutes and he's got to be out the door. So
Planning commission at 7.
we have planning commission at 7, and we have people that I know want to talk to us. So,
One more thing for the agenda.
yes, please.
We can go past the budget now. So if you got any questions over the next week, email. The last item for the agenda for next week is the 2023 roadwork bids. You have those in front of you. There's 3 pages there. They broke it up by project, 1, 2, and 3. Last page, I just manually went and totaled it all up for you. Total road work for next year, $594,000 and change. We have 600,000 in the budget, so it came in, I had a pretty good guess on my part, I thought. But it's actually gonna be a little less than that and a little more than that. It's not gonna be 594. First off, it's unit prices, so this is based on unit prices. Second, we have additional costs that are put on by the road commission for their overhead and their engineering work. So that adds to the cost. But on the good side is that we get a $50,000 credit every year from the road commission. So what you're gonna see, instead of, when we get this all shaken out, it's all done, instead of 594,000, we're gonna be somewhere around the $580,000 range. Still well within budget. Yeah. $50,000 credit they give to every township in the county because of an increase that they received in taxes many years ago. And a little bit of arm twisting, they were willing to convince that they should not just keep that in their own budget and help share that with communities that are willing to invest our money into their roads like we do.
All right,
That is,
that's all we've got on the new business.
that's all I've got on new business. You'll see number 4 that we got a couple of things to talk about, but what time do we want to talk? You know, I got number 4 and number 5 on my memo to you.
Yes.
We're gonna take time to talk about it. We gotta be out of the room by 7.
Quickly. And we can double back to that next week if we have to, but has everybody seen Al's memo that on workshop that had that list of items on it?
Yeah, I sent this out a couple days ago.
Yes,
We have the.
I got it now.
You got it?
We haven't talked about number 4 or number 5. Number 5 does not really need any discussion. That's just for your information.
I think we reject number 5. We're not letting her leave.
Yeah, I know.
We're not letting her retire.
Yeah.
Knowing that we got folks that want to talk to us, we'll leave the rest of it for next week if we want to discuss it then. I know you got to run. I'll get back to you and do a download on what we hear and comment and.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely want to discuss it.
Pardon me?
Definitely want to discuss it.
All right.
So
You can keep that.
Okay.
All right,
Yeah.
so let's go to public comment, and I know we've got folks in the room tonight. I also know that we're up against planning commission. Why don't we take them first as they come, but try and keep it to 3 minutes, and tonight I'm gonna bother with a timer just so that we can make sure everybody has a chance. And if you just, your name for the record and.
I'll go first. Mitra Delaney.
Okay.
Linda, I believe you owe me an apology. I hear very well, and you didn't need to raise your voice at me and tell me, Mitra, you know, this is not whatever you said. So I believe you owe me an apology.
I didn't mean to be rude, Mitra. I'm sorry.
Not raise your voice at me, just like I wouldn't at any of you, but you did. You raised your voice. You basically yelled at me. So, okay, I'll take your, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Tara Toner. I live at 6188 Standing Stone Drive, and today I've been asked to speak before you on behalf of the Laketown Residents Committee. I have 11 signatures, so that should buy me 11 times 3, 33 minutes technically. Hopefully it won't take that long. I don't think it will. But I am providing this board a copy of what I am speaking, a list of questions in a reference section. So can I?
Yes, please. Grab Gary's and get it to him.
I'd also like to make sure that my comments are then shared with whoever records the meeting minutes so they can be accurately reflected. My first set of comments will pertain to the Walters house that was purchased on 11/14/2022. On December 21st, 2022 was an illegal meeting. No notice of this meeting was given to the public. This was verified with the 2023 calendar of meetings document, posted legal notices and Facebook postings. These all confirm that no notice was given. This violates not only the Open Meeting Act, but also the Building Authority Act 31 of 1948. Any decisions made during this meeting that have violated the Open Meetings Act may be invalidated per section 15.27, section 10.2 of the Open Meetings Act. Second, the township board and by extension, the building authority cannot take on a mortgage which constitutes a debt without a vote from the citizens of Laketown. In RS of 1846, chapter 16, section 41.3 states the township board shall not create a debt or liability against the township unless the creation of the debt or liability has been authorized by a vote of the registered electors of the township. While the board can approve the purchase of a property under the law, they cannot do so by taking on debt that has not been approved by the votes of the citizens. The creation of the building authority came at the behest of the township board. It is effectively a delegation of powers. The board cannot delegate powers that they themselves do not legally have. Third, the November 2nd board meeting was the first time the board spoke publicly of the Walters House property. However, Al in the meeting minutes had stated that he had already signed a purchase agreement for the property. The date of this agreement was November 1st, 2022. This is prior to the November 2nd board meeting. In the revised statutes of 1846, chapter 16, section 41.75A states that the township manager shall perform duties lawfully directed by the township board. And I would like to emphasize the words lawfully directed. Any lawful direction from the board could not have come prior to the November 2nd board meeting unless the board themselves acted in violation of the Open Meetings Act. We would like to formally ask the board the following questions. How do you plan on remedying these three major issues? 2, if you believe the board, and by extension, the building authority, is legally able to take on debts for the township without a vote by the people, please provide an exact sections of the law that give you this authority. 3, was it Al who acted outside his legal authority, or was it the board? And if so, which members acted outside their legal authority? On a separate page, it's the third page, there's all the applicable laws that I've highlighted for your convenience. Now to move on our budget items. Felt Mansion line items. The last available public form 990 from Felt Mansion was from 2021. In 2021, Felt Mansion generated $473,000 in revenue in 2019. 2021, it generated $473,000 in revenue. In 2019, it generated nearly $300,000 in revenue. The total expenses for Felt Mansion listed in the detailed line items in 2017 outside of the bond and bond interest payments was $175,000. At this point, there's no reason that Felt Mansion is not sustainable on its own. If it is not, it is because the board is not managing their expenses properly. And by the board, I mean the board of Felt Mansion. Outside of our required bond payments and bond interest payments, no additional money from the township general fund should be allocated to Felt Mansion. It is time for Felt Mansion to survive on its own. Master plan. One of the reasons the township has a master plan is so that all citizens understand the direction the township is going and the activities that would be taken to facilitate this plan in the upcoming years. Some of the things that are noticeably not mentioned in the master plan is the purchase of the Walters House, a renovation of the Heiser House, or the investment into solar panels at the township. It appears that the board is operating outside of the established master plan. The board's decision to purchase the Walters House was done so despite the fact that the majority of citizens on record, 84%, were in opposition to the purchase, 5 opposed, 1 supported. A similar pattern is seen with the Heiser House remodel and the solar panel project. The vast majority of citizens' comments have been in opposition to these projects, and yet the board has yet to vote against these projects. The board is supposed to work for the citizens and at least represent what the majority of the citizens want. And it appears this board only represents a select minority of its citizens. It is your actions that speak most clearly to us. Next, a general request for the time of the workshop board meetings. It would be much appreciated if the workshop board meetings could be moved from 6 p.m. or later and on another day of the week. Tuesday was suggested. Many citizens work normal 9-to-5 jobs, and that makes it impossible for them to attend a 5 p.m. meeting. I know while citizens' participation may vary at times, a routinely scheduled public meeting should reflect a time that works for the majority of its citizens. Internet and telephone. The total budget line items for internet and telephone in the township are $60,000 per year. This is up greatly above the previously established baseline from 2014 to 2018 of $7,000 to $9,000 a year. Can the board explain and justify these expenditures? Capital outlay. The budget lacks clarity in large cost items where transparency is paramount. For example, there's a total of $278,000 slated for capital outlay throughout the budget. Also, items that are truly expense should not be labeled as capital. If there are known or identified projects slated for this spending, they should be specifically line itemed out. From the outside, it has the appearance of a $278,000 slush fund that has been scattered throughout the budget. There are line items in the budget for as little as $200. Yet the line items for capital outlay range from $20,000 to $100,000. There's an inconsistency within the overall budget with the resolution of our line items. Can the board please provide a higher level of transparency here? Pay raises at 6%. A 6% pay raise in these economic times is not justified and not aligned with what we see in the private sector at this moment. The only people that we should be considering giving pay raises to are those who have not received any over the past few years, such as board members, clerk, supervisor, etc. As a group, we do not support this pay raise. Contract services. Contract services for the township and board in office are up 75% from 2021. Spend in 2021 was $93,000 and 2023 budget has it at $163,000. The township's board department budget is up overall by 53% and the office department budget is up by overall 37%. We have also hired more staff over these years as well, community development position, public information officer. Our contracted services and the overall budget for these departments should be going down, not up. Can you please explain in detail why you need each of these line items? On a side note, after listening to this conversation, it sounds like contracted services, for at least the township section of the budget, represents donations on behalf of the citizens. I don't see how that the township should be donating anything on behalf of our citizens. That is not the function of a township. Donations should stand like for us at an individual level. We should get to decide who we donate. We also get to then take the tax deduction for those donations. But that's just from what I heard today. Next, expenses. Unidentified expenses labeled as expenses have gone from $1,000 a year in 2021 to $8,500 a year in 2023. What is driving up these costs? I think that is all I have for this committee.
Well, I appreciate your speed on running through that. You made it under 9 minutes, so.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Hi, I am Emily Petkus. I'm at 6174 Standing Stone Drive. First of all, I would just really like to say thank you to Jim Delaney for standing up and voicing his concerns for the citizens. Means a lot to us. Just a touch point on the BPW conversation. It was said that we probably won't have time to add language that you, Linda, felt was necessary. This is a huge decision for the township. It's going to cost a lot of money. I think we need to have in the paperwork everything down to a T if that's what we go forward and decide. And I also think that citizens should be given a chance, like via newsletter, to be aware of it, that this could be a major change for us. I also think that as a township, we need to consider our needs over our wants. Like you mentioned, the fire department needs, is going to need a new truck, new hoses, things like that. Where we're still having this conversation about solar, which is a complete want. It is not a need. It's not something that we have complete funding for. And just to piggyback off of what Tara said, the contract services, and when we're talking about transparency, when you see contract services, you do not think donations. So let's be upfront in our budget so that the people know. And if we don't have money to pay for things, like we have to take out a mortgage for a house that the citizens weren't even allowed to make a decision on, then I don't think we should be donating to all these different entities that the citizens don't really have control over. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Kevin Elfrink, I live at 6181 Farmview Drive. First off, I'd like to thank Tara for putting all the information together. She's really spent some time digging into the township's stuff. Regarding the budget, I mean, I apologize, I spoke up earlier, so I apologize, Al. But we haven't, you know, here's your budget. Yes, it's 100 pages. Park Township's 100 pages. It probably takes some money to put this together. But I mean, you can go through this, and I can leave this here with you, Linda, but I mean, you can see what they pay for gas, for stamps, I mean, it's broke down. If Jim, who's on the board, if he doesn't know what's in here, how are we supposed to know? As a citizen, I mean, if you don't know, how are we supposed to know? So that's, you know, maybe something, I mean, there's graphs and I mean, it probably costs some money, but what if, God forbid, something happens to Al? Who knows what's in what category? Is anyone? That's my budget items. As far as these meetings, are they recorded on YouTube where you can go back and look at them? Or is it just live? You don't have to answer that now, but if they could be like recorded, so you could go back tomorrow and rewatch it. I think that would have some transparency. That would help some people that can't make the meetings. They can rewatch it and show some concerns. And if you already have a live feed, it shouldn't be that hard or cost any money. Regarding the pay raises of 6%, I'm just gonna speak to what I know. My wife's a public school teacher in the public sector, which you guys are kind of in the public sector too as well. They're only getting 1% raises as a public school teacher. So to give everyone 6% raise, you know, the people who haven't gotten them in a while, okay, I can understand. People making less than $50,000, yes, they might need it, but people making close to $100,000, I mean, I didn't get a 6% raise. And if you figure out in the last 4 years, some of these people have gotten 14% raises in the past 3 years. That's not happening in the public or private sector. It shouldn't. So yeah, just my opposition to some of the staff's 6% raises. I'd also like to know if the internet, $60,000 on internet seems pretty high. Again, I emailed the board. You should have all my comments, but I just want to make it known here. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the room tonight before we go to the folks on Zoom?
Sure. 2 seconds. Karen Massengill, 627 143rd Avenue. Make it quick. I wrote it down. Jim Delaney, thank you. Thank you for doing judicious work for taking care of our money. I agree and support and concur the vocal and written citizen comments submitted to the board tonight. One additional point regarding a salary increase specifically towards Al. I understand the discussion's up. I understand that the budget is probably set. However, many of Al's duties, well, he's currently close to 2.5 years remaining on a 3-year resignation contract. I've yet to receive any response to my questions regarding what is the actual plan of action to ensure we have a top-notch replacement and a clean transfer of duty. Many of Al's past duties have been transferred to the new township positions. His main focus should be documenting and identifying all historical and current data to assist the new supervisor in the newly created positions. The remainder of his focus should be ensuring the chief has exactly what he needs: roads, utilities, and our safety. Based on past board meetings, I am confident that we will be paying direct and indirect salaries toward 2 supervisors for an undetermined amount of time. We need to be looking and planning ahead. This, in addition to the written and verbal comments regarding this subject, is why I do not support any increase to Al's compensation package. Side note on just what I've heard about the elections we got coming up that Amber asked. I love the way that we handle our elections here in Laketown. Our staff is top notch. It makes me very nervous in this crazy atmosphere to start co-working with other entities for our specific elections. Just that's a little side note. Lastly, I look forward to reading the written and signed citizen comments that will be attached to the oral meeting minutes in the Laketown website and the Laketown Facebook page. I also am eager to read the timely responses to questions that have been communicated directly to all of you. That's it.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the room tonight? Or do we have anybody on Zoom, Jim?
I don't think so. I see no hands, but I don't want to ask.
Is that it for comment tonight?
I have one question.
Oh, is that Stacy?
Yes, it is.
Go ahead, Stacy.
This is Stacy LaFever. I'm at 6565 Lake Effect Drive. And I just had one question in reading over the audit. I am a CPA, so I have a little bit different view on those. And I'm looking at, if there is an imminent retirement of Al, we have a large lump sum commitment. And I don't see where we have been setting that aside. And I'm concerned maybe we don't have the funding for that. So I don't see it in the budget. I don't see it really just in the financial statement that it has been set aside. And the cash balances that are disclosed just at one point in the year really don't point to whether we have the money to do that. And I really don't want to be in a situation where you have to borrow money to pay wages. It didn't make sense to me. So I wanted to, because I couldn't see it, I wanted to make sure that we are thinking about that.
Thank you very much. Anybody else on Zoom, Jim?
I don't see anybody.
All right. Make sure you're up.
Delaney, 6298-144th. I heard Al saying that there was double posting. I was a hospital administrator for years and did the finances for over $4 million of department and budgets. I have never heard of a system double posting. People put in things into the system. So I don't know how in the world that happened. And then who was our CPA? And I want to know how much was paid like last year and this last year and what the total ended up. I think you have it. What's the total of what was paid to the,
I don't have it
to
right in front of me, but it's the same. No, it's the same group that we've had for years, Keycover.
but I believe it doubled from 18,000 to, can you look
We
at it a
can
minute?
get you that information.
Okay,
I think Al covered
and
that.
why in the world did that double? So, like I said, I've never heard of that. And then the other thing I'd like to know is, I believe it was last month, Supervisor Howell, you said that in spring that we're going to have Laketown new website, everything updated and everything new and everything. So it's almost spring. So I'd like to know, we would like to know as residents, when is that exactly going to be totally updated with finances all put on there? The budget and the monthly finances, everything.
I can get you the update on that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else in the room that's here for the long board workshop as opposed to planning commission tonight? Oh,
I just wanted to give you this.
oh, great.
It's already printed out, color.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and close public comment then. The only thing I want to make the board aware of is that Jim Johnson and I, since we did the contract last year, we've already started the process for the annual review. So you'll be getting from me a questionnaire on your views that'll go into Al's annual review and the annual goals and where we are on the goals from last year. So that is underway. And I wanted to make sure you guys were all aware of that. I got a ton of great information from Mac this week, but we are late. So I will either circulate it or hold it for next week. And other than that, unless anybody from the board has anything else to make planning commission wait even longer, we'll call it a night on workshop.